Welcome to the Science of Parenting podcast, where we connect you with research-based information that fits your family. We'll talk about the realities of being a parent and how research can help guide our parenting decisions. I'm Mackenzie Johnson, parent of two littles with their own quirks, and I'm a parenting educator.
And I'm Lori Haynes, parent of three, and they are all in three different life stages. And I'm a parenting educator. And last week we launched season 3.
Yay! Yes, talking all about temperament. I can't believe we made it all the way to season 3 without you. You've been very patient, Lori.
I have been patient. I know. And last week when we were done recording, I just was so excited about everything that we had shared. So if you haven't heard it, it's all right. Go back and you still have plenty of time to listen to that first season. So this entire season, we're going to be talking about temperament and how temperament impacts your parenting. So just a quick reminder about what temperament is and what it isn't before we start. Temperament is our predisposition to how we react. So it's inborn, it's genetic, it's with us from the very beginning of our life. It's our behavior that goes way back to the beginning. And many times people ask, well, how is this different from personality? And I like to think of temperament as the foundation with which we start. And then on top of that foundation, we begin to layer some patterns of personality. We layer on our own growth and development. We layer on our life experiences and how we interact and grow with others. So it's always there and it's always been there. And I love what our writer, Barb Dunn Swanson, has been reminding us as we've been writing and sharing and researching. And she says we have to remember that temperament is a gift. And we as human beings, we place value on gifts. And our temperament really is our gift to the world. So through love and guidance and support and structure, we can learn to interact with others, and our own unique temperament adds value to who we are in the world.
Yes, I love that. I love that so much. She's so good. Well, and another thing to remember about temperament is the researchers Thomas and Chess and James Cameron and his colleagues at Kaiser Permanente, they have done research on thousands of kids' temperament traits for 30 plus years. And, you know, what they found, which, again, we talked about this more in depth last week, but what they found was each of us have these 9 traits, these 9 temperament traits. Everybody's got them. The question is figuring out, did we get a little of this one or did we get a lot of this one? And did our kids get a little or did our kids get a lot? So we're going to be walking through kind of figuring that out, exploring each of these traits over the next few weeks. But if you're looking for more information on temperament and kind of that background information, of course, you can listen back through our episodes this season and find information on our website, scienceofparenting.org, for more of those temperament resources. So for today, we're going to dive into this first of the 9 temperament traits, sensitivity.
Sensitivity. Yes. Here we go. And like Mackenzie said, we are sharing all of our resources on our website. So if you missed who we're specifically citing, or if you want to know about how did Mackenzie find these profiles that we're going to start talking about, go back to our website and check it out. But let's talk about sensitivity.
Yes.
So when we think about sensitivity, I like to use Mary Sheedy Kursinka's definition and thoughts on it. And she wrote a book called Raising Your Spirited Child. And she described sensitivity as the sensations around us that are all soaked up. And I love that description. They're all soaked up. They're soaked up.
That's a word picture.
It is
talking
definitely.
pictures? That's a word picture.
Pictures. So it's our 5 senses, and we soak up our sensitivity through our sight, our touch, our smell, our hearing, our taste, and also our emotions. And so from an early age, we actually learn sensitivity by how we connect with others and how others react and interact with us. And our senses and our emotions are really tightly connected. And how we use them essentially is dependent in part on how our brains are wired, which we talked about in season 1. But also, how aware are we to what's happening around us? Sometimes I like to think of this as that forgotten trait. It can be very much hidden in the background, but it has a huge impact.
Yes.
So, my question as we start off is, I know that you had an idea of what that word sensitivity meant, but now with that definition and those word pictures, what do you think about the word sensitivity now?
Well, I like to preface this for everybody watching and listening. Lori has a lot more experience with temperament than I do. She's done temperament consults and lots more temperament education. So I kind of consider myself the rookie. So I'm kind of learning along the way, if I'm honest. So as I think about my understanding of sensitivity, kind of when I was first diving into it, I always thought it was so feely, like very emotion tied. Like I'm very sensitive to like, do I cry at a movie kind of sensitivity. And so I didn't recognize all of the like five senses portions of it. And so that was kind of what I first thought. And it's kind of morphed over time as I've heard you talk about it. And as we've been doing research for this season, the five senses and how important that is. And then the piece of those five senses, which like, I feel like this literally just clicked like very recently that like how much I notice about what I'm taking in from those five senses. Like, do I notice that it's really loud? Like, do I notice the texture of my food? Am I sensitive to that? And then, yeah, even that you might be sensitive to certain senses and not so sensitive to other ones. Like, that has really morphed my understanding and how aware I am of that experience of my senses. Yeah.
I will tell you that's very common. As people think about
it
is very common. People think about it only in terms of that emotional sensitivity and not that whole soaking it in through the senses. And so I think that that's an aha. It's like sometimes when it comes to temperament traits, that first aha of what that particular trait's definition really is and what it means for us as human beings. So,
yeah.
All right. So now that we know what sensitivity is, let's think about it on the temperament continuum.
Wait, can I regurgitate it back to you and make sure I'm operating on the same page? Okay.
Yeah.
One more time. So sensitivity is about, like Mary Sheedy Krasinski says, the super sensors, if you have high sensitivity. So how much you are aware of the five senses and your like emotion feeling. So some people are very sensitive and really notice those things. And some people might be less sensitive and are kind of non-reactive to those things.
Exactly.
Okay. That's sensitivity. That's what we're talking about. Okay.
And you drew us right into that whole idea of it's a continuum. So there's this pocket of people who have gotten a huge bucket full of sensitivity, and you said Mary's words, right? A super set of sensors. So they have this high degree of sensitivity, and their sensors are on high alert. And then there's this other bucket of people that they are less sensitive or non-reactive. And so what research actually tells us is when it comes to that continuum of who got what and how much, there's actually kind of a pool at each end of the spectrum. So think of it this way. So on the extreme ends, maybe 15 to 20% of the people received high sensitivity to the definition that we shared.
Like really noticing those things.
And then the opposite end of that spectrum, there might be like 15 to 20% of the population that doesn't notice those little subtle things happening. All right. We're going to give some examples. And then in the middle, there's this big flux of 60 to 70% of the people that, well, you might just be saying, as we talk about this, well, that depends, Lori. Well, that depends, Mackenzie. Yep. And that's that 60 to 70% of the people kind of they're in the middle of that spectrum. Yes. So if we think about that higher, the super sensors, how sensitive is our child to loud noises, bright lights, wet clothing? Are their feelings easily hurt? Are they easily overwhelmed with just too much commotion? And if so, you might say that they have a higher sensitivity level. On the opposite end is someone whose child might be less sensitive, and they are less sensitive to those types of subtle types of things like a weather change. They might not hear a whisper They might not see or understand that look from across the room that says, stop what you're doing right now. Okay. And so what we're talking about, remember, is these natural inborn sensitivities to our surroundings. Okay. This is not a diagnosis for a clinical problem called sensory processing disorder. Okay. Two very separate things, right? I just want to make that clear along our whole temperament journey. A highly sensitive child does not automatically receive a clinical diagnosis for sensory processing disorder. We're talking about natural inborn sensitivity. Okay. So those children who are just not as aware of their sensory surroundings can be less sensitive and non-reactive. And then there are those children who may be more highly sensitive. So yes, I did assign you homework. And
you did.
What I assigned you was to go out and do a temperament profile on your children. And those resources are on our website. But tell me, Mackenzie, what did you find out about your children's sensitivity level?
So, as I share, I have 2 littles. And so I found that my daughter was on the little bit more sensitive side. So she wasn't like at the extreme of high sensitivity, but a little bit on that end of, between middle and high sensitivity. And my son was actually kind of more in the middle on the lower, like non-reactive side. Okay. But the other part of the assignment was me, right? And my co-parent. So we both also took temperament profiles. And so I know that's a factor here too, right?
It is. Yes. So quickly, I'll share. I have three children, right? 3 different ages. One's launched, one's in college, one's in high school. And the 2 children, the oldest and the youngest, are less sensitive, kind of in that middle to less sensitive range. And then my middle daughter, she is more highly sensitive, like myself. So we'll talk about how that plays out in some examples here shortly. But so tell me a little bit about how, when you recognize those 2 profiles, the adult profiles and the children's profiles, and when you look at sensitivity, what do you see there?
So I noticed that what I discovered about myself was I'm actually not that sensitive. Like, I'm pretty non-reactive when you look across like the scale for this particular trait, that I'm like maybe not picking up on those things all the time. And so that was interesting for me. I thought I might be more sensitive. And it did make me think about thinking about being overstimulated. I've talked about that. But that does remind me okay, but that's been something that's kind of come to fruition more recently for me when I recently have been, getting mental health help, and that's been helping address that. So again, temperament versus diagnoses, and so those things. But so, yeah, I was more non-reactive. So I wonder if maybe I don't notice the pileup of that. Okay, yeah, it's loud, but maybe I don't register that. So it's loud and I'm hungry and it's like the pileup, but I don't notice that pileup necessarily. But
and then
so I was
all
a little
of
more
a
non-reactive.
sudden, yes,
yeah. But so that difference between my daughter and I, and so even though she's not all the way on the extreme, I'm a little more on extreme. So even her little bit of sensitivity sometimes to me is come on. That's not very nice. But it is to me, it feels, because it's so different, because it feels so different from me. Sometimes that difference is hard. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I remember a story about my middle daughter, who I said was more sensitive, and her teacher in 2nd grade had the coldest room in the school, and she had the northwest corner where there were windows, right? And so that room was cold. And my daughter, who's highly sensitive, she was oftentimes, hearing the lights buzz, or she would hear the children in the classroom clicking their pens or moving their desks. And so because and she had to be in the front of the classroom just to help her with certain school, needs, etc. But her teacher, because she was so cold in that corner classroom, in the winter would bring in a space heater. And I remember the day that my daughter, 2nd grade, and she's telling me, it's just so loud in there, Mommy. It's just so loud. And I remember thinking, what could be so loud? And so at conferences, the teacher and I were talking, and the teacher said, well, I have her right up here. And I looked and I saw the space heater right away. And immediately I thought, oh, she's hearing that space heater go on and off. And then the other thing that she said, it's so loud and it gets so hot, mommy. And I thought, oh my goodness, that heat is blowing right on her. So as a highly sensitive kid, yeah, she noticed all those things right away. And they were hard for her sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and those experiences of lying more on that extreme, and your ability, like you said, you're also more sensitive. And so your ability to see and recognize, like, okay, she's also pretty sensitive. So she could very easily be picking up on these things.
Yeah, she's like me, which sometimes I wish, I think, oh gosh, I wish she wasn't so sensitive like me because, but at the same time, you know what? I rarely have to discipline or to be firm with her because she's so sensitive that I just have to speak in a voice like this, very matter-of-factly, and she gets it.
Okay, so another thing that's really important to understand, right? We have this continuum of things. I kind of want to explore what this looks like at the different ages, right? So ways that we might see this sensitivity on both ends of that continuum, whether you got a lot in your bucket or a little sensitivity. How does this play out for some maybe common challenges kids might experience on both ends of the spectrum? So can we I'll quiz you a little.
Okay, go for it.
If we start with our littlest, like our infants or toddlers, a situation where if they have a lot or if they have a little, maybe we might see sensitivity play out.
All right, and then move to high school.
Yeah, we'll move on through.
All right, excellent. I'm ready.
All right. So let's start with that youngest, that infant and toddler sensitivity.
So thinking about things that happen and that parents are really focused on during that infant toddler time, let's take diaper changing or toilet training for a good example for sensitivity. Think about a child who is less sensitive. So a less sensitive infant and toddler, they may not notice those signals prior to urinating. They may not notice those signals prior to having a bowel movement. And so they may not notice the wet or soiled diaper. They may not give you those cues that it's wet or soiled until you're 30 miles down the road without the diaper bag.
That makes sense. So what about the sensitive child when we think about like diapering?
The sensitive child then might be the child that the instant they feel a wet or soiled diaper, they need it to be changed. And maybe they're not finished. And so you end up changing it 2 times in a row, right?
Yes.
Or maybe they do have to go to the bathroom again. Like you literally, everyone went outside and you literally have to go to the bathroom again because they need to go. And so with those infants and toddlers, with that sensitivity, it's a matter of figuring out, where do they fall? Because you can learn their cues and they can start to help to learn their cues as well.
Oh yeah. That example in particular for that age, thinking about my 2 kids, they're not on the extremes, but they are a little different. And so my son doesn't let us know. And sometimes that's problematic versus my daughter, was much more likely to notice immediately and let us know. Okay, so what if we move up the age range here into preschool? What's a common preschool thing with sensitivity?
So preschoolers are doing things on their own, right? They're getting dressed. They're becoming independent. And so sometimes I will say, if you think that sensitivity is not a big deal, then let me ask you, why do you think clothing companies have gone to seamless socks and no tags? Because of sensitivity, right? A highly sensitive preschooler refuses to put those socks and shoes on. They refuse to wear those shirts that have the itchy tags. And, as they're gaining their independence, they're saying, I know that I don't like this and it doesn't feel good. Therefore, I am not wearing it. And on the opposite end of that spectrum might be the child that never wears a coat, the preschooler that constantly takes their coat off and forgets it. They might run outside without their shoes on. They might dive into their food when it's still hot. They are not noticing those small, subtle changes. And again, remembering that no matter what age, it's really not intentionally defying you or not listening to you, even though you've told them 16,000 times. It's just that natural tendency, that natural bent they have towards, I didn't catch that subtle cue. I'm less sensitive. What was that?
I'm very apt still. I mean, as a kid, but even as an adult, my like non-reactive, non-sensitive, I absolutely go out barefoot. In fact, if I need to like take out the garbage, let the dog out, even in the winter sometimes, like I'll be okay. Like, oh, there's not shoes here. It's fine.
In my sensitive daughter, I've really never bought her a lot of clothes because she likes the feeling of the clothes that she has. Those are the ones that she wears. If I buy her something new, I might have to introduce it to her several times before it then becomes part of her rotation, or we would have to suddenly have, we lost that because it was so dirty and disgusting. But, it was, that was her. She was sensitive. That I feel I'm comfortable with this.
Yeah, felt right. Okay, so let's keep going up on to let's do like a school age-ish.
Okay, so middle elementary school age, sensitive. Let's go less sensitive. So a less sensitive child in this temperament conversation would be that child that possibly doesn't catch the look from the teacher across the room. So let's say the teacher gave some kind of head nod to indicate it was their turn to go do something. Or the teacher, gave them that look that said, I wouldn't do that if I were you unless you want to go to the principal's office. Okay, the less sensitive child is not going to catch those subtle cues. Oh my goodness, I just thought of one. The flipping on and off of the lights as an indicator that it's time to transition to a different task.
Yes.
In all honesty, the less sensitive child may not catch that light flicking on and off. And so they're not intentionally defying you. They just didn't catch it. On the opposite side, that sensitive child, again, like my daughter, they may hear and feel and see every little thing. They may notice when they may notice that someone else clicking their pen next to them. The fire alarm happened to be right outside the computer lab. My daughter's first day of kindergarten, they had a fire drill. It took her months to go back to the computer lab because that sound, that noise. And so, those are the types of things when it comes to sensitivity in elementary school we have to think about. And like I said, that's why I said it's kind of one of those hidden things.
It's subtle.
Very subtle.
That's subtle. Okay, then as we think about like the developmental tasks and common things happening with some of those older, like middle school or teenagers, those kinds, where might we see it play out there?
So sensitivity here can kind of be a hard thing, especially when it comes to social relationships, since that's really what's happening developmentally there.
Yes,
and so thinking about those passive aggressive types of relationship things that happen, a less sensitive person might not notice when someone is being passive aggressive, and therefore they could, become a target for more passive aggressive things to happen. The less sensitive, they just might not notice that their deodorant isn't working. And we know that hormones and body changes are happening at that time. They may not notice some of those, things about their clothing or their hygiene. And a highly sensitive person, that high schooler might have their feelings hurt all the time. And other people are thinking, it's not that big a deal.
They looked at me wrong.
They looked at that teacher hates me. And the teacher may have no idea. And so, yes, there is no good and bad temperament. And it changes with developmental things that are happening, so that the temperament doesn't change, but how we respond to it changes.
And the tasks we're facing, like, developmentally and situations in our lives and things, those morph.
Exactly.
Okay, so if I understand, all right, we understand what sensitivity is. We know some of us have a lot of sensitivity, some of us have not so much, and that it looks different, at different stages and tasks and things. Like, okay, what now? Like, so as a parent of kids who may have a very sensitive temperament, may lie in the middle, or may be kind of non-reactive, now what?
That kind of brings us to research tidbit number 3, or what research likes to call goodness of fit, and it's where we
Mhm.
learn to respond to our child's natural temperament. And so the original researchers, Chess and Thomas, they're the ones who coined goodness of fit. And it's that idea of learning to understand and support children's natural tendencies. And it really helps us to not blame the child, or even not to necessarily blame ourselves. And it helps to bring out that fit that's best for both of us. And it may make our job easier because ultimately we're learning about and beginning to really understand the behaviors in a way that could prevent behavior problems. Or, as we think about, there's no good or bad temperament, it's a gift. It's unique to each child, and each trait has assets and liabilities. And beginning to learn and understand and appreciate is really that thing that builds that positive parenting and goodness of fit.
Absolutely. And all of those things kind of also make me think of season 2 on self-care. We talk about understanding and seeing our kids' strengths and our own, and, and like having a plan for our kids, and like feeling competent and having a philosophy. Like all those things are things that are ways we can feel better about ourselves in parenting, which is a way we take care of ourselves, right? Is like building the skills to do the things that we need to do. Temperament can help us do that too, right? Like goodness of fit and figuring out those strategies. That's good for all of us.
It's absolutely good for all of us. I love you gave us an example as we were talking about goodness of fit. Do you mind sharing that example?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So talking about that, my daughter and I, she's a little more sensitive and I tend to be way less sensitive. And so this goodness of fit of where our temperaments naturally are, there's a difference there. And I might even say the word clash, that sometimes there's a clash. And one example that came to mind in particular, thinking about those 5 senses, was right now, in the summer in particular, we have a black car, and it gets really hot in the summer. And so a lot of times when we go to get in the car, my daughter is like, oh, the car seat, it's so hot, the car seat. And like, okay, roll the windows down, hurry, get the AC on, mom. And like, she'll ask me when we're walking out of childcare, mom, is the air conditioner on? And so, because she's that's, and I mean, I've recognized that's a thing she does, but helping myself understand, like, she's sensitive to that. Like I know the car's hot and I see that, but like, it's not that big of a deal to me. And so one way I think the goodness of fit is me being less sensitive. Sometimes I maybe lack empathy with her like sensitive experiences. 'Cause I'm like, are you being dramatic?
Yeah.
Which is not a nice thought. But I might
perceive. I have called one of my children a time or two a drama queen.
And yeah, it's not, but it is like that difference in our temperament. And so how do we create that goodness of fit? One of the things that we kind of do I'm not changing her temperament. And even if we go back to that thought of like authoritative parenting, of like providing warmth and having appropriate expectations. Well, I'm not going to tell my daughter, oh, it's okay, you don't have to sit in your car seat, right? The expectation is still to sit in your car seat, but I can anticipate, right? I can kind of like, maybe we do have the AC on, or we have the windows rolled down, or, empathizing, even just saying like, oh, I know it's so hot for you, let's hurry and roll down the windows, instead of you're fine, right? That's a non-empathetic response would be if I said that. And so just a few things that, I'm working with the temperament. I'm not going to fight it. I'm not going to say, don't feel. You're sensitive. You're going to feel. And so
I love
that way.
I love that. You can't, how do you say, well, don't feel? Don't feel. I'm going to feel.
Yeah, I'm going to feel.
I'm going to feel.
What about you? What comes to mind with goodness of fit and sensitivity?
So I think it's that idea of, so I'm very sensitive. I've always been very sensitive. I cried at every episode of Little House on the Prairie. And I remember thinking, oh, I wish I wasn't so sensitive. And so one of my children is sensitive like me. We have super sensors, and the other 2 children are not. And so, like I said, I rarely have to raise my voice to the daughter that's sensitive because she's so sensitive. And then there are times where, as a parent, that I've had to raise my voice with my other 2, and I want to almost get mad at them because they're not so sensitive. They're not crying or they're not upset. Or they must not be taking me seriously enough, because if my parent ever had to raise their voice like that, I would have been crying. And yeah, there's that
like expectation.
Yes.
Okay.
And I need to not have that. They're going to respond differently. And yes, they're hearing what I'm saying. They're understanding what the change in their behavior needs to be. And just because they don't have the same reaction that I do as a child or I did as a child does not mean that my discipline is not effective. It was very effective. It was very effective.
I also think of goodness of fit in some ways that we might be very similar. You know, like, so we talk about the clash of sometimes like you have a good fit with your child and that you can understand them a lot because you're both sensitive. But there's also like a caution there, right? Like I know one of the research things we looked at talked about, or one of the researchers you talked to talked about, sometimes we might over empathize with our child. Like, okay, yep, you know what? I know that car seat's really hot. I get it. And then maybe we don't hold the appropriate expectation for our child because we get it. And so like that can also cause a challenge with goodness of fit too, right? We need to have good expectations, appropriate expectations for our kids. So there's a lot of, whether you're really different, really similar, kind of somewhere in between, we still have something to learn from the temperament.
And I love that also allows us to stick true to our science and parenting, values, and that pluralistic parenting. What works as a tool for one parent is not going to work as a tool for another parent, and temperament might be one of those reasons why.
Yes.
So
we're finally saying it. We've been thinking it since we started talking about pluralistic parenting forever ago on Science of Parenting. And here's the big message, guys.
Yes.
Every kid's temperament's different. Every parent's temperament's different. Every situation's different. That's why there's more than one way to raise great kids.
Absolutely.
Even if so-and-so did it different than you.
Exactly. And yes, it's going to look different for each kid as well in your family. Well, let's take some time to look at some tools. So what could we use? What tool do we have? What can we put in our parenting toolbox? That's what we want to do. We want to keep filling your temperament toolbox with tools, parenting toolbox. And so my really simple tool is called, ready?
I'm ready.
Observation. Just observation.
Observation.
Sometimes we are so busy doing and being that we forget to sit back and observe and look around and think, okay, what's really happening here? What is it sensory wise that I'm missing? What is my highly sensitive child seeing and hearing and feeling that I, as a less sensitive parent, might not be? Or how about my less sensitive child who is missing the subtle cues of the people around them who think they're being too loud? And so just a tool called observation. How about you? What kind of tools do you think about?
Well, I like to create some steps or some framework or a model. And so as we talked about sensitivity and kind of your reality of the strategies you practice as a parent, kind of 3 words came to mind for me of, okay, if we understand temperament, what do we do? Like, what's our strategy once we understand? And so as we understand sensitivity, the 3 words that came to mind for me is we can anticipate, we can empathize, and we can teach.
Yeah.
So we're not gonna, right? I kind of come back to that basic parenting style of providing warmth and responsiveness and holding expectations and appropriate demands for our kids. So if we know our child is sensitive, we can anticipate when challenges might come up. Or if they're not sensitive, right? They may not notice. I may need to give them a few extra tools to pay attention to those things. And then we can empathize. Whether our temperament's very similar, our temperament is very different. Empathizing with your child, that like validating their experience. It's not good or bad. It just is. And, listening to what that is. And then the third one is teaching, right? Our kids are going to have this temperament forever. And there's going to be layers, right? Development and personality and life experiences that'll fit on that temperament. But our job's not to change it. We already know that. So we can teach, right? Maybe if you're a less sensitive kid, you need a few more reminders to bring jackets places, or you need to learn when you're going places, you need layers to take on and off, or those kind of options depending on what your kid's temperament is. And we get to help teach them those skills.
And we get to help teach them those skills over and over and over. And especially when we know that those temperament traits are falling on those extreme ends of the spectrum, that's where we really have to recognize that we may remind them to take their jacket 16,048 times.
Yes.
And that's because they're on that extreme end of the temperament continuum. And as a parent, we just know that we become so much less frustrated with the fact that we tell them again and we tell them again and we tell them again. And that's just the way it is. So,
and we can expect, like you can learn to expect that this might be the case. Like, and it's not because you're doing it wrong. It's not because your kid's difficult. It's not because it's just, we're going to have to tell them a lot. That's how they're going to learn.
And temperament is that foundational piece. So on top of temperament, remember, we're going to layer their age, their development. You know what? Young children use loud voices. And there are some children who are hard of hearing that use loud voices. And sometimes we might have to look past temperament and look at, okay, is there something that is developmentally not correct? Is there something that we need to look at having assessed? And, actually using observation or the framework that you shared, it allows us to take in that whole picture of what's happening around us, what's happening around our child, and also their other caregivers. And so we have this whole realm of people that can help us with these observations, with anticipating, and ultimately these navigate some of the best outcomes for our children when we take it all in.
Yes. Good for our kids and good for us to learn a little bit more.
So I think this brings us to our stop, breathe, talk moment. And it's in this space that we bring in our producer, Mackenzie DeYoung, and she shares with us something that is a secret to us. And she tries to take us, out of our perspective of, okay, you just punted and you gave us all the easy stuff, you guys. I want to give you something harder.
It is really hard to stump you guys, though. I just have to say this.
We've been coming through.
And I'll tell you on this one specifically, I thought I had it figured out, and then right at the end, you kind of almost answered my question. Where you? Yes,
got it.
Yes.
Maybe we'll stump you.
Right, maybe. Yeah, I don't want that to happen. But I would say that I relate to so many of these things that we've talked about today. I, on that temperament scale, am highly sensitive. And
she is.
Thanks, Lori. Seriously, I relate to Mackenzie's daughter in the temperature thing. I hate sticky things. I'm a texture person. I'm a temperature. I cry really easy. I am a very sensitive person. And because of that, in some situations, I've been misunderstood as being wimpy. I don't like spicy food, so maybe wimpy or a crybaby, really dramatic. And I think a lot of those, there's lots of things that play into that, but my sensitivities play into that a lot. That being said, it kind of leads me into the question as well. For you guys, as a parent, how can I, if I'm handing over my kid to the babysitter, to grandma and grandpa to watch for the day, to the teacher, to some random person in the store while I go into the bathroom. Maybe that's not safe, but how can I advocate for my child who is highly sensitive so that others don't perceive them as dramatic, as a crybaby, as wimpy, but they see that they're just highly sensitive?
That's a good question.
That is. Make them listen to the Science of Parenting podcast episode on sensitivity. Is that the right answer? I think that's the right answer.
That is the right answer. You said the key word. You said it yourself. Advocate. Advocate. Speak up and advocate for your child in terms of, do you need to have a conversation at a different time with a teacher and say, hey, I've been listening to this great podcast on temperament. And I just need you to know that, that my child's temperament is more sensitive. We're trying to give her some tools and techniques as she grows and learns about her temperament and her sensitivity. But I just want you to know that, if this happens, it's not personal. Here are some words that we say. Here are some things that we teach her when we know that it's going to be a bumpy, clustery, hot bus ride. Can she sit up towards the front where the door opens and closes frequently?
Yeah.
Just offering those times and places for advocacy. You said it.
Yes. And I think as I think about like the 9 traits, it's not always like, oh, my child has every single one of these very high, right? So you'll start to recognize which traits come into play most often, or maybe are on those most extremes. And so, if sensitivity is one of them, I think of kind of providing opportunities repeatedly, like in conversation. I think even with childcare providers with my kids, like on some other traits, just helping to remind them like, oh yeah, I would expect that of her. She picks up on that, or flipping the lights, that doesn't usually go well when we do that at home. That really seems to really overstimulate, and so sometimes reinforcing, that advocating, and that you might, like we said, with kids, you might have to do it repeatedly. Doing that with other caregivers, that you might need to have those conversations repeatedly and casually sometimes explicitly, but sometimes casually.
And thinking also about, you made me think about food, introducing food several times in several different ways, whether it's peas or beans, just keep introducing it, and not introducing it in a negative way. Right.
No.
So there's a big long story in my history about liver and I, right? And so, but a repeated, positive exposure to liver may have helped instead of one big negative exposure to liver. Those types, when it comes to sensitivity, because those senses are very heightened. So it does taste different to a highly sensitive child. It does feel different. So give me some positive exposure to it.
Yes. And that picky eating, that's one thing I don't think we touched on through the whole episode.
Is
like the taste.
That is super me too.
But like that sensitivity of like that texture or that taste, feel, like that experience. I'm very aware of it, and versus other maybe not so much. And so that can be a factor. So that positive exposure.
I was thinking about this, that different exposure, that sort of thing. I actually had this realization the other day, because I am sensitive to texture, lots of food things, that like I am not a big fruit eater because of the textures of a lot of fruits. But I was like, I wonder if I would like the fruit juices of more of these, because I really like apple juice and orange juice, but I don't eat a lot of apples and oranges. So I'm like, I wonder if I would like more fruits than I think I do if I just did the juice form of them.
That's a way you're kind of like anticipating and teaching yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
But you could also say to someone, if they're sensitive to foods, so maybe they'd like this, and this, rather than, oh, they're just dramatic, just make them sit there and eat, sort of a thing. So, all right, I'll stop bugging you guys, but thank
Good
you
question.
for the advice.
Never a bother. We love having our stop free talk space where Kenzie kind of reminds us to like, okay, like we talk about in parenting, to stop, take a breath, take in this information, and then kind of think and talk through some of the specifics you bring us.
All right.
Love
See you later.
Bye.
Oh, I'm so glad we got that picky eating thing in there. How could we have forgotten?
I know. We got almost all the way through here and almost didn't say it. People need to know. I would say it's changed a lot between my significant other and I. Like I was like, oh, you're difficult. Like, why are you being difficult about it? It's like, okay, you're noticing things I'm not. Like, maybe you're not being difficult.
Exactly. So that was our first of 9 temperament traits. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 2 or 3 traits, and then we're going to focus on a special topic. And as we talk about these 2 or 3 traits, we're going to go kind of deep, just like this, talk about the bucket that's really full with this temperament trait and the bucket that's not so full of this temperament trait, and how do the ages of children play into it, as well as what about that goodness of fit between the parent and the child caregiver, and then what are some tools that we can use as parents.
We'll walk through all of that with all these. We got all kinds of good ones coming in season 3. All kinds of good ones.
Yeah.
So we're excited to share them with you.
So thanks for joining us today on the Science of Parenting podcast. And remember, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. You can watch us on Facebook each week or join us when we go live and take your comments and questions. We're going to be doing that a little bit differently. We're saving it for our special topics, I think, this time around. So pay attention to when we're going to do those lives.
So come along with us as we tackle the ins and outs, the ups and downs, and the research and reality all around the science of parenting.
The Science of Parenting is a research-based education program hosted by Lori Haynes and Mackenzie Johnson, produced by Mackenzie DeYoung with research and writing by Barbara Dunn Swanson. Send in questions and comments to parenting@iastate.edu and connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. This program is brought to you by Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/ext.